Asia's mission, ADB's mission is poverty alleviation. Even though Asia has been growing consistently for a long time, we still are the home of the greatest number of the world's poor. So that we are steadfast, and that will be our mission. We have 17 European member countries. All of our, if you're talking about bidding procedures and procurement, all of them are open to all of our member countries equally. So I'd say European companies have as much a possibility as any other of our member countries to have their companies get contracts from ADB. I think one of the hardest things for European companies, and Spanish or Catalan companies also, is how do you get all the knowledge and experience that you have here in Europe translated to Asia? And how do you have relationships with what are the kind of things that are needed in Asia? How do you get to know counterparts? And I think this isn't unique to Spain or Catalan, but it's certainly one of the hardest bridges for Europe to do. But in terms of the cultural barriers, and you know, I don't see that as much of a problem, because if you're in Asia, you really feel that it's very international. It's a very international place. They really welcome, they've been welcoming trade and engagement with the rest of the world for a few thousand years. So I don't think that's the problem as much. I think there's just, it's getting out there and doing it. It's starting it. It's knowing people. It's knowing what is needed in this market. More knowledge. You know, I think it's very interesting to me to watch how countries in Europe have specifically said, we want to engage in Asia, and have committed to doing it, and have really put a lot of energy and time into making that happen. And I think I mentioned in the interview about working through the European Commission. That is clearly an opportunity. The European Commission has funds to get European companies engaged in Europe, and I don't see Spain in that queue, and I don't know why. They're not the only ones. I don't see many countries in that queue. But it's an opportunity that some countries have taken advantage of. Asian countries have had an inflation of asset prices in their economies since quantitative easing has started. We know that their stock markets have gone up. We've seen that housing prices have gone up. So we're also concerned about what's going to happen. I think we've had a little taste of it in September when we saw immediately the funds were withdrawn from the markets. It had a huge impact on a number of countries in the region immediately. So in a sense, it was very good to get a taste of what may be coming, to prepare ourselves, economically speaking, for what may happen. I think they're preparing now that they've seen what happened. What we need to do is actually, and I'm going to use an expression, double down. Double down. I don't know if you know what that means. That means when you do something and then you say, you know what, I'm going to do it twice. I'm going to make it even bigger effort in this area. I'm going to double down on it to make the economies more resilient. That means being very careful that they're not as dependent upon the flows from developed countries into their stock markets, into their banks, into their asset prices. They've had experience of this already, right? In 1997, where a lot of money went right out from Asia and it left them in very bad shape. That's not going to happen again. It's not going to happen because their foreign exchange reserves are much bigger. Their current account deficits are much smaller. They're keeping very careful track now. I guess the way I think of it as an economist is that it's not democracy per se, but it's whether or not the people feel they have a voice. We know that you can progress with an economy year after year, and you can lift many people out of poverty, and you can prosper. But unless it's sustainable and long term, it doesn't matter. For example, let's look at Sri Lanka. When I first went to Sri Lanka in 1981, it was booming. I mean, the streets were filled with markets, and people were doing very well. The reading level and other health indicators were actually very high for Sri Lanka. We've had 30 years of civil war, and now that country is at a lower level of development than it was in 1981. So these gains are very hard to make, but very easy to lose. So if people feel they have a voice and they've bought into the system, you are more likely to sustain it. You know, in Europe, one of the hardest things to do is to, let's say, have a community where some people are at a very high income and some people are at a very low income. So how do you get one kind of set of policies? And I think about that when I think of ASEAN, the ASEAN community. We have some countries like Singapore, which are very high, and some countries like such as Laos or Myanmar, our newest member. I don't want to say our newest member, our newest, how can I say, more active member, because Myanmar has been a part of ADB for a very long time. How do you actually bridge that? When you're sitting around a table and you talk about policies, how do you have policies that benefit the very poor as well as the much wealthier countries? This is always one of the hardest things to do. But for Asia to work harmoniously, remember, like Europe has been living harmoniously for much longer than Asia. We had fighting in Asia very recently. So this kind of harmonious existence, I think everyone realizes they need it for continued growth and prosperity. But how do you achieve it if the gap is getting bigger and bigger? It creates stresses in the system. I have to say, in my discussions, the Europeans have made it very clear that they are concerned about ADB projects involved with these companies. And I'm going to say it's predominantly an issue of subcontractors. We will engage one contractor. They may set out their subcontracts to other ones. And the question is, how are we, or how is anyone monitoring the work of these subcontractors? In every case, Europeans, companies, at least with anyone we're doing business with, they're very concerned about that. They're very concerned, even at an institutional level. For example, what is the ILO's view on this country, on this company? And I'd have to say, because of that, there has been a huge uproar in Bangladesh, and a big group of Europeans have gotten together to actually work with the ILO on labor standards in this country. Asian Development Bank will certainly not be involved with any company that is not able to comply with international labor standards. And our shareholders, 17 European shareholders, have communicated that very clearly to us.